All right, we might get started today. Thank you everyone for coming to the Welcome to 30 kilometres an hour Learn Shop. We welcome you here. My name's Rowena Foster and I'm from Wollongong. And it's my pleasure to moderate this meeting this afternoon. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the Darwar people, the land in which we meet. We pay respect to elders past and present and those emerging, and extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people residing within the Wollongong or your local government area. So thank you for taking the time this afternoon to participate in this meeting. You are very welcome here and you can access this meeting any way you feel comfortable. You're welcome to keep your video off or you're welcome to leave it on. You are welcome to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, or when it comes to the Q&A session, you are welcome to speak directly. If by chance there is any background noise on your end, it'll be my responsibility to possibly mute you for that time. And if you would like to pin the speaker, you can do that by going to the right-hand corner of your screen and clicking on the three dots and then clicking on pin video. And that means that whoever is speaking at the time, you can actually pin that to your screen. And that means you won't have an interrupted view or an interrupted experience. You will all be aware that we're actually recording this meeting as well. I'd now like to welcome the following presenters to this meeting. That is Lena Huda, John Lindley, and Matthew McLaughlin. I'll be guiding you through this meeting, providing direction and transitioning conversation and going through the meeting agenda. The plan for today, you can see on your screen there, we have got Lena speaking first from 30 Please, and she's going to share with us the benefits of area-wide limits over isolated, physically calmed, low-speed zones. We're then going to introduce John Lindley from Safe Streets to School, and he's going to share with us a grassroots campaign with local chapters and also sharing about a Wollongong case study. And our final presenter is Matthew Teppy McLaughlin from the University of Newcastle, and he's going to share with us about making it Australia relevant and translating what we know about 30 kilometres an hour speeds for the Australian media. And we're actually going to finish off today with an opportunity for some extended Q&A time. Any questions that you have in the Q&A time, they can be directed in the chat box at me directly. You can identify who the question may be for, or if you would like to ask that question yourself. So let's check we are all on mute and let's get started. So firstly, I would like to invite Lena from 30please.org to share with us this afternoon.
Hello, welcome. So that's great to see that today we can run the session again, the LearnShop session that we were running on Thursday at the Australian Walking and Cycling Conference. So good to see you here. We also have invited supporters from Safe Streets to School from our different chapters. So I hope a few of you also come from that way to listen to us today. So I wanted to kick off this meeting with the benefits of area-wide 30K limits over physically calm isolated areas. Here on the photo, you can see the neighborhood where I grew up in. That's my mom cycling on the street. It's in Germany, 30K neighborhoods were rolled out starting in the 80s. And it's something that was done to create an environment, neighborhoods where people can walk and cycle, where kids can play on the streets, where people can connect, but also cars can basically have access to the houses. So that's basically what motivated me to start this topic in Australia. So I like to start with this slide about travel time, because I think that is something that we probably don't really think about so much, and maybe get it wrong a little bit in our head what it means. So for example, when we have a short distance of 1K, to walk takes around 12 minutes, and cycling is around 3 times faster at 4 minutes. So, but both of these mode of transports are really efficient. Like let's think about, walking with a good public transport network is a really good way to get to the train station without having to look for a car park, for example. Because if we drive to the train station that's 1K away, that takes around 2.9 minute pure driving time if the speed limit was 30K, or 2.3 minutes if the speed limit was 50K. And that's the other thing that I want to show with this slide, is that the difference between a 30 and a 50K speed limit is actually pretty minor. And often, we often overestimate that. And the other thing that I think you can see is, if you're a cyclist, what a good way it is to get around town. Also, like for 3.5K distance, takes 14 minutes to cycle to that destination average. And you don't have to look for the car park and so on. So it's a really, really good, walking and cycling are really good for short distances, and are also really competitive with cars. And the other thing that, the difference between walking and cycling, I think what to put this into another way to think about this. So in order to have your travel time, you have to double your speed, basically. So, the difference between getting somewhere, which is, let's say, now let's talk about speed limits a little bit in this context. So first of all, let's say you could actually go at the speed limit the whole time, so that still you would have to double the speed limit to have the travel time. But then the other effect that we have is, in an urban environment, is that we can't actually go at the average speed all the time. And that's because there's intersections, there's other cars, there's time congestion. And so in general, even if you made the speed limit, let's say 100K in a neighborhood, that wouldn't really change much in terms of how long it actually takes us to get somewhere. So the marginal benefit of going anywhere faster than 30K is pretty minor in an urban environment. And this is the other side of the coin. So why is it actually that we are worried about getting hit by a bullet? And that's actually the speed that we really have to worry about, and that makes this bullet so deadly. And it's the same with cars. So the speed kills, and that's because the kinetic energy is proportional to the square of the impact speed, and human bodies can only take a certain amount before they sustain serious injuries. And so it's really like, the slogan "speed kills" is really based on physics. So the speed determines, first of all, if a driver has time to stop his car, to prevent a crash from happening. And the other thing is, depending on, how high the speed is, the more deadly crashes are going to be. So, for example, it is around double as risky to get hit at a car impact speed of 40K to 30K. And, even though the absolute numbers here of the risk of death, there's different studies on what the absolute numbers are, but all the relative difference between these different speed limits, that's pretty clear, that 40 is double as deadly than 30, and then 50 is a lot more deadly. It's normally at least 5 times deadly than 30. And so that's probably why that by on the global level, we have a lot of countries that use these 30K limits in urban environments. And it's kind of the sweet spot between getting somewhere in a reasonable time, but also having the balance right, that people still feel safe to walk and cycle to their destination, for people to let their kids play outside, and not kind of putting too much emphasis on fast cars in this urban environment. And the other thing I think that maybe have, let's say, if you do go, some people say, oh, why 30? Why shouldn't we go lower? And yeah, of course, if you go lower than 30, that can be, it's even more beneficial for like safety benefits. But, you know, for example, also if you have a 10K speed limit, that also slows down cyclists, and that's, you know, there's a big difference in terms of time impact between 10K and 30K. And we just have to make a conscious decision. What's a good speed for a certain environment? I would hope that somebody else would try to do more about play streets. That's something that I would really like to see here. Play streets is something that I know from Germany is where we have 10K speed limits on like cul-de-sacs, so that actually they're proper, really, really calm streets where kids can do like skateboarding on the street and things like that. But it's a bit of a different thing rather than the 30K, which could be applied to whole neighborhoods. So, and you know, if you've been to an Australian holiday park, that's actually where I was really surprised when I first went to one, where I actually saw that this environment that actually does exist in Australia. So there's this low traffic, low speed environment. And I also saw that there in that environment, children were actually also really given the license to be independent road users. And lots of small children cycling by themselves on the bike, going on the skateboard without parent supervision. And it was really nice to see as well how the social norming works in that context. So my husband, for example, he was told off by a lady for going, I think he was probably going 20K, and he was told off. And that's what I mean by the benefits of the area-wide speed limits, is that it creates like a social norm that neighborhoods kind of belong to everyone. And it's not just the physical calming that works here, it's actually a lot more in place. It's more that people just say this is an environment where everybody should be safe. And I think it's also a good argument. Some people tell me, oh, you know, the problem in Australia is not that kids don't walk to school. It's not really traffic. It's more stranger danger. But, you know, I have seen that people are happy to have their kids independent with a lot of strangers in a holiday park, you know, and I would think that, you know, in your neighborhood, you know, ideally you really should know your neighbors more than you should know people who are in a holiday park. So it's probably really not the big factor in terms of how school travel happens in Australia. The traffic is probably a really big factor. And so, you know, maybe taking one step back, what are, you know, what is at the aim of our campaigns? And it's kind of to try to change what the you know, that the idea of going slower is, you know, thought about as a sensible idea. And that's basically what grassroots organizations can try to achieve. And politicians, they always kind of have to think about where is that window of public opinion about what's an acceptable, sensible idea and so on. And obviously we, you know, by talking to politicians, we can also influence what they think, where that window is, because obviously it's not obvious where the window is. But the other thing is, of course, the more people, and that's what we're trying to do, are giving like a voice who support this idea of having safe neighborhood streets, the more, like, for example, media attention we get and so on, the more we normalize it, and the more easy it is for decision makers to actually act on it. And I don't want to say with this slide that there is no, that politicians couldn't act on this now. I think, you know, we've seen it in other countries as well. Sometimes you find a really like strong political leader who looks at the evidence for this and just implements it. And also what we know, the other thing that I learned in the road safety talk is that speed limits, normally when you ask people about them, most people always think the current speed limits are good. It's like a status quo kind of thing. So people normally think the status quo makes sense. But then when you change, like lower the speed limits and ask them again 3 years later, most people again agree that the current speed limits make sense. So just keeping that in the back of our head. So, you know, and the vision to say, you know, what we're trying to achieve with 30 police and safe streets, to say that we want children to be safe when they walk or cycle to school, that is really a vision really widely held by many Australians. And also the Heart Foundation found in a study that the large majority of Australians supports lower speed limits in neighborhoods. And the other thing that we know from UK data is that while in the UK they did surveys about 20 mile per hour, which is the same like 30K, and they asked people, the majority of people is supportive of them, but they think they belong to a minority with their view. And that obviously makes it a bit tricky for people to openly support it. And so the UN has last year mandated 30K speed limits in areas where motor vehicles mix with pedestrians and cyclists. And so, you know, I've lived in different European countries, and you know, my experience is that there's a lot better walking and cycling infrastructure in those places, also in Japan. And when here some advocates start asking for 40K, we should really think about why would we in Australia need, you know, a higher speed limit than other countries that actually have a lot more infrastructure. I think it's really important to try to you know, stay with, you know, what's the global mandated and also what the global best practices and where we have the most evidence, because there's a lot of countries and a lot of cities where we have a lot of research on how good that is working. And so advocates should ask for that, in my opinion. So the other thing that 30K limits in neighborhoods would do is they would send a strong message to society what government wants people to do. How do we want our streets to be? So you often see that slogan, streets are for everyone. And I think that's exactly what we are implying when we say, okay, in drivers, you drive 30K in this neighborhood, it implies the street is for everyone. The next thing that happens is that when people drive slower, they get a bigger cone of vision. So they, you know, from having the tunnel vision on, like in a motorway, you know how you can't even see what's happening right next to you. The slower you go, the more you see what's going on. And also, you know, the friendlier also often places come, you know, when somebody drives slowly in their car, they might wave at their neighbors. The faster they go, the less you will see that kind of behavior. And you also see psychologically that people start, like drivers might just become nicer, giving people priority who want to cross the road, things like that. Then you hopefully will see more children playing outside, more children walking and cycling to school. And that, again, having more people there is creating a safety in numbers effect. And then you will have residents who will remind people who speed of the speed limit, and you create that social norming, and that will enable neighborhoods also to ask for more placemaking or safety improvements, because, you know, obviously 30K is just one part of the kind of journey of making us more walking and cycling friendly. There's also other things that need to happen, but I think it's a really important stepstone. So for, you know, for one of the most important factors for parents to decide if their kids have the license to walk to school or not is if streets are easy enough to cross. And that depends on the number of cars, the driver behavior. So for example, if cars in general stop and let people cross, that makes it obviously a lot easier to cross the street, how fast cars are going, and the crossing facilities, the infrastructure. And often we focus only on infrastructure. So we say we need crossings, and I obviously completely support that, but it costs a lot of money and it is not easy to roll that out fast. The other option, what we're talking about here, to say, okay, we want lower speed with education, enforcement, and light traffic calming when necessary, that would, you know, hopefully make driver behavior better. It would get the speed of cars down, and it also might get the number of cars down. The number of cars in Australia has increased by a factor of 4 since 1970. So there's a lot more cars. So it has really changed for kids to walk. It has become more tricky just because of that. And the more we can do to encourage walking and cycling to school, the less cars we're going to have on our streets. The 80-20 rule is something that I was in my early career as a salesperson. My boss told me, well, you're going to make 80% of your profits with 20% of your clients. And in that context, it's quite hard to know which clients that will be. But this kind of principle holds for a lot of things in life. And And when I did some research and read that in Munich, 80% of streets have 30K limits in residential areas. Then I really thought about that again. And so it's probably the same concept. 80% of cars are circulating on 20% of roads at a given time. And that are normal arterial roads, the way we drive. We normally just spend a little bit of time in our neighborhood, go to the arterial road, and then that's where we spend most of our time driving. And those streets, especially when you have a lot of traffic, that makes a lot of sense to separate pedestrians from cyclists and people who cycle from cars. That's around 20% of the street network, and that's a huge task for Australia to get there. But the remaining 80%, we probably can achieve a lot by making them more into these shared environments with low speeds. And the interesting thing is, I think drivers would also, you don't almost notice it as a driver, but it has really minimal effect on you because it is just the last few minutes of your journey. And the combination of low traffic neighborhoods and 30K is a really good one, where you really think about that principle and bring it together. And I think we could achieve a lot with that. So the other thing we have here in Wollongong, we often don't have footpaths because we have the kind of windy streets, hilly streets. It's expensive to build footpaths in a 50K environment. They have to be raised. And so often it's not feasible, too expensive. But if we lowered the speed limit, we could achieve a lot of things with paint. And we could also, if we did it like that, we could also separate then the people who cycle from the people who walk, which is really ideal for people who walk. They should ideally have their own space and not have to share with anybody else who's a lot faster than them. So in Australia, we used to have 60K as a default urban speed limit. And when it was reduced, it has reduced the amount of casualties around 19%. So we know it has worked, and it hasn't, the change of the default speed limit was not done by physical measures. It was just done by changing the speed limit. So we know it does have an effect if you get speed limits down. And to say that you always have to have traffic calming, or you have to make the road narrow and so on, that I think is a bit, obviously that helps a lot. I'm not saying that doesn't help, but the reason why in Australia people got 110 on motorways and not faster than that is also social norming, and it is enforcement. So there's no physical means by which you couldn't go a lot faster on an Australian motorway. You could if you wanted to, but it's just not something that people do because that's just not the social norm here. If you were showing those motorways to German drivers and you didn't show them what the speed limit was, I'm sure they would go a lot faster than the average Australian driver. So when some people say, oh yeah, 30K is a good idea and we should do it in high pedestrian areas. And that's really not good enough, because first of all, if you just do like a little isolated area, then you probably really have to think more about traffic calming. It's really hard to then change that kind of social norming if it's just like an isolated little strip on the street. And also it doesn't really take into account that, if you have low pedestrian area in other areas, it's activity in other areas. It's just doesn't mean that maybe there's no activity because of latent demand. And also, obviously, it doesn't fix up the network. If we want people to be able to walk and cycle to their local shops, then the whole network has to be safe. In school zones, they are very successful in terms of reducing serious injuries. So they work, and they don't have actually physical calming, because they're actually only just in place certain times of the day. But they're mainly there for, kids who are driven to school. They benefit the most because they basically are crossing the street from their parked car to the school within that safer environment. And as soon as drivers leave that school zone, they're actually even reminded to speed up to this unsafe speed again. And kids who walk on cycle all the way to the house, and they're, in that environment, that's not very good for them. So it's just not good enough to make them these tiny little zones around schools. So smaller speed reductions over wide areas bring more benefits than big interventions in specific places. And Dick van den Deur has done a really great study on that. You can find it as a research link on our webpage. And here you can see how that's a German street, German 30K street. So it's not much about traffic coming. Car parking can actually function as that as well. And then you can do some inexpensive stuff to, support it. But it shouldn't, we shouldn't ask for that first, because that's just gonna really slow down the process to get anything done. So we should have 30K now, and then we can add the traffic calming, and we can especially use data to find out where it's most needed. So speed humps are at the moment used because we basically work not with the social norming at all, and we use speed humps, and they are really should hopefully become a last resort, because they encourage drivers to maintain drive in a way that increases acceleration and braking related emissions. So they're not very good for the environment. They also create noise pollution, and they're not very good for cars. And we know that the repetitive signs that display a driver's current speed, education and enforcement can also work really well if we go more the other way of area-wide low speed limits. And I think for the Australian context, the technology is so much more interesting as well, because speed humps is like a really kind of old school kind of way to slow cars down. We have already geofencing is being used already for e-scooters, so we can completely then design our cities and changes in the future how fast we want devices to go in certain areas. So that exists. We just have to, somebody just has to look into it, how to apply it. And intelligent speed assist is something that's now been made mandatory for new cars in the European Union. And they've published studies on their webpage on what a great cost benefit that has. Intelligent speed assist basically means that your car displays to you the speed limit, and it actually slows down the car to the speed limit. And the driver can, if he wants to, override that speed limit by pushing down hard on the accelerator. But that's a technology that will save a lot of lives in the European Union, and it's also really, really low cost. And it's not on the table in Australia at the moment, and that's probably because there's not enough people pushing for it. It's something that would protect our kids, pedestrians, cyclists the most, and needs to be, I think we really should try to be louder that we want that. So the mixed traffic environments can be really nice for cycling, because cycle lanes and separated cycleways are really, really good in a lot of contexts. But if we sometimes it's also really nice to be able to cycle on the street. Kids in particular like these, low traffic neighborhoods with low speeds are really nice to have the space. And also we don't have to then think about the intersections so much, because separated cycle paths without good intersections are really not an ideal solution for cities. So in Germany, actually, after they've rolled out the 30K zones since the 80s, and then over time they also removed actually separated bike lanes, because it was considered safer to mix once you had that mindset change. So also for urban planners, I think if we had 30K limits, it really does enable a lot of things to get it done a lot more fast, a lot more cheap. For example, at the moment, if you want to plant street trees at a 50K limit, it's often said it's too dangerous for road safety. If a car crashes against a tree, too dangerous. Footpaths, they need to be raised in a 50K environment. Too expensive is often the argument why you can't do it. Outdoor dining is too dangerous, often also too noisy. And pedestrian crossings, if the speed limit is high, then they're really expensive. The lower the speed limit, the easier it is to put in place. And some, at some stage in a 30K environment, normally you also don't really need to put in these crossings, but you obviously still can. So when I sometimes think about when I was when I was a teenager, actually, smoking was really widely accepted, and when I went to nightclubs, it was always lots of smoke. And I did not think that would ever change. It was not something that I thought we could, that was just there. just unthinkable that that could change. But, you know, it did change, and it's really similar. Lower speed limits would also benefit everyone. And you know, obviously a general ruling, it would be far more efficient than a rollout street by street. So now, if you have your phone there, it would be, or your computer, it would be great if you could go to menti.com and help us with some questions that we have. So let me just go to the Menti so you can see actually what I want to go. So the first question I have for you: what LGA do you live in? Easy one to start with. Can you also, you have to go to menti.com, code 28728639. So we have, I might give you another 20 seconds. Okay, at 21 watts. Okay, excellent. So the next question I have for you is, so that one is one, do you think if we were as a campaign promoting to voluntarily slow down to 30K in neighborhoods, do you think that would help our campaign, or would it not, or you're not sure? Okay, that's interesting. Or maybe some more words coming in. Yeah, that's because, you know, the background basically is, it's a bit obviously different thing to say voluntary. It would obviously, I think it's nice, you know, I do drive 30K in most neighborhoods when I see it. And I think it's like, obviously it's not going to change a lot of other people's behavior, but it's actually also gives yourself a reminder of, you know, I don't plan in a lot of extra time for that. It's not at all, actually. It's just a way to also then practice it a little bit. Yeah, oh, and this next one is, of this presentation I just did, was there like one piece of information that was like more memorable than others? For example, like the travel time, the gun, or the holiday park, or anything where you like thought, oh, that was something within that context of driving slower I haven't really considered. Yeah. Okay, that's super nice. Thanks. That's actually like some advice, you know, it's really, really helpful for me to know what kind of works and what people remember. Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for your help on this. I want to now hand over to Rowena for the next, or actually John. So maybe Rowena, maybe I give over to you. I stop sharing here.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena. That was wonderful. And thank you to everyone who's been adding some questions and some great comments in the chat. I'd now like to introduce John Lindley. He's the founder of Safer Streets to School. And he's going to share with us this afternoon about grassroots campaigns with local chapters, including some information about a Wollongong case study.
Thank you, Rowena. Good afternoon. My name's John and I live in Wollongong, New South Wales. And in Wollongong, maybe not surprising, the great majority of short trips and school trips are actually made by private car. What I wish to talk to you about today aligns closely with what the walking and cycling conference theme was on Thursday and Friday, which was global lessons and local opportunities. We're really focusing on what is happening globally and how can we apply that locally. The desire to live in a more egalitarian society where sustainable and safe, active modes of transport for school and other short trips are not only provided for, but are also encouraged, is a driving force for the advocacy that I engage in as part of a team of local active travel advocates. Safe Streets to School has a vision of safe neighbourhood streets to allow and encourage independent walking and riding for children to school and for other short trips right here in Wollongong, across New South Wales and around Australia. The population health benefits are significant. The benefits are through a greater proportion of the population being habitually active throughout their lifetime. During the pandemic, connecting communities has been and will continue to be more important than ever. And local schools have been a real focal point of connection. So this photo was taken during the first week of the current New South Wales lockdown. And it really displays what safe, active neighbourhoods can look like with low vehicular speeds and also low vehicular volumes. Streets are shared spaces for community connection and exercise, and it's the latent demand for especially children, but for all population groups, has only grown during the extended lockdown in New South Wales, where you often see young children riding or walking independently. It's really what our whole campaign is about. So over the past 3 years, I've been a community representative to the Wollongong Walking and Cycling and Mobility Reference Group. And my perspective of safe, active travel to school has been greatly influenced by my role as a parent of 3 young primary school children and also as a high school teacher. I've always taken my responsibility seriously, with a focus on advocating and informing council on community feedback in relation to making the entire journey for children walking or riding to school safe. During this time, I've undertaken surveys with school communities, focusing on feedback from children, from the children's perspective of what it's like to walk or ride in their own neighbourhoods. And the focus has been on working out current travel modes, desired travel modes, and barriers to active transport. Insights from the surveys match with more formal research. Children want to ride and walk to school and through their neighbourhood, and families want these trips to be safe for their child. I've shared insights from the community surveys with Wollongong Council. And Wollongong Council staff are listening and have taken some promising initial first steps. Wollongong City Council has formed a Safe Routes to School working group with the traffic team, and they've also had a shift in the language when considering a child being safe on their entire school journey to and from school, and not merely at the school gate. Wollongong City Council is also working with school principals using a risk matrix to make improvements on adjacent streets to school. And we want to encourage that work, and we want to continue to ask for more. Of course, these issues are not confined to Wollongong or New South Wales, and they are a result of a direct design and planning for road transport networks to prioritise vehicular travel over active forms of transport. So I would like to get your input if possible, please. And we're going to go to another Menti. So if you can go to that website and enter the same code. Great, thank you. That's a really interesting snapshot, and I think it's possibly it shows what the trends were when in the earlier years, and it also will highlight the difference in travel to school that is happening now. Okay, thanks, Lena. Fantastic. Thank you for that. One more there. Okay, I'll just share my screen again. And it's not moving on. Just give me 1 minute, sorry.
I really did expect technical difficulties after our last session.
All right. I've got it now. It'll work now. Okay. Okay, so really what I wanted to grasp in those questions was to just highlight today versus how it was, and something that Lena mentioned earlier with the significant increase in cars on the road. It's made walking and riding to school difficult because of crossing the street. And what it's led to, as we all know, what it's led to is a significant proportion of children being driven by private car to school, which has a bit of a snowball effect in terms of, because there's so many more cars on the road in the school area, it actually makes it unsafe or more unsafe for children to walk and ride. And we've talked about that idea of what makes a street easy to cross, and there's many factors, and some of those factors are really highlighted in Wollongong, where I live, in terms of the number of cars, a lack of crossing facilities, the speed of cars, and also driver behaviour. So they're some of the things that we'd like to address so that we can reverse the slide away from active transport in children and for other short trips. It was also really interesting to see the perspectives on the age when you feel that children are safe to walk independently to and from school. And there was a few examples there where people had indicated at 6 years old, which is fantastic if that neighbourhood supports that in terms of safe streets to cross and safe travel. And it's certainly what we see overseas in terms of children being encouraged to walk and ride from a very young age because the environment, the road or the local transport network is made safe for them. So we really want to see really young children being able to walk and ride safely to school independently. Okay. So to reverse the significant slide away from active travel, we need to, as a matter of urgency, do more than what we're doing currently. And the tools and evidence of best practice for streets where people riding and walk with mixed with vehicular traffic is really clear, especially for our more vulnerable community members, children, elderly people, and people living with a disability. From surveys, we found that barriers to active transport were similar across the LGA, and with vehicular speeds being too high, lack of priority crossings, and inadequate separation. So in the 3 years that I've been actively engaged with council to look for solutions for school travel for kids walking and riding, our initial steps were really focused on safe crossings, priority crossings, and separation, which Wollongong Council is doing quite a bit of separation in terms of footpaths, but it takes a lot of time and it's a big cost. So after spending some time with other local advocates, we really focused our message and started looking at the idea of the 30 km/h speed limit for area wide or for within the school catchment area, and looking at the cost benefits and also the ability to roll that out more quickly and in a more equitable way so that active transport is accessible and safe for all community members across an LGA. And one of the difficulties that is cited in Wollongong is that there are so many educational institutions. There are over 84 educational institutions in Wollongong, and that for that purpose, an area-wide 30 km/h limit with priority crossings or footpaths where that's not appropriate is a really great way to make it equitable for all community members. So the common barriers that we've found, and working with a focused group of local advocates, led to forming Safe Streets to School with specific evidence-based requests to make active travel for school children safe. Safe Streets to School is campaigning for pedestrian priority crossings and footpaths or 30 km/h speed limits on all non-arterial roads within a 2 km radius. So during our time, or personally during my time with advocacy, I've really learnt a lot. And some of the things that I've learnt from working with others in this space is the importance of engaging with a team of advocates. And within that team, really working to people's strengths and encouraging each other to engage and to ask for what we want. I've also found it quite important to take breaks from engaging in the advocacy at different times. Another focus on our advocacy that has proven to be really effective across a range of issues, and Lena mentioned smoking and the changes that happened over time in Australia, but having clear and concise requests, which is what Safe Streets to School has established as part of our request for improvements, and really that ability to focus on your message without getting sort of caught up in other competing messages. The other thing that I've really learned to do is to keep things in perspective and to understand that change takes time. And while it takes time, there are things that are happening that need to be celebrated. So we've really found it important to celebrate the wins and thank the people involved for making these changes possible. So the image there is a separated path in Wollongong, and just taking a night ride with the kids not only helped to celebrate what had changed, but also helped to really focus on why these improvements are so important. Okay. So this, the journey to school needs to be safe for their entire journey to school. Sorry, children need to be safe, and streets need to be easy to cross. And streets that are, the barriers that are in place at the moment actually stop children from being able to walk or ride to school in a lot of cases. And so our advocacy is focused on what we want to see. And what we wish to see is safe, active school travel. We wish to see shared neighbourhood streets with low vehicle speeds and volumes. And we wish to see connected neighbours across generational, cultural and ethnicity backgrounds. And really the idea is streets for people. So the benefits of active neighbourhoods and safe shared spaces are well known. And this is an example of some of the things that we see when we have active travel that is encouraged and made safe at the moment by parent supervision in terms of walking to and from school. So when kids engage in active travel to and from school and active play generally, they're more likely to engage in creative endeavours and imaginative play independent of adults. They're able to develop teamwork and problem-solving skills. They engage in risk-taking, which is crucial to healthy development. And they support peers and look out for each other. And of course, it helps greatly with connecting neighbours. So evidence and lived experience shows that active school travel leads to more active after-school and holiday activities in neighbourhoods. This slide just indicates why countries love 30, and it's showing that children walking and riding to school is significantly higher in countries that have had 30 km/h area-wide limits for decades already. So our engagement. Since Safe Streets to School was established, we've engaged with Wollongong Council through we engage with local council, we engage with local community, local politicians and the media. And we've engaged with local Wollongong Council through 2 community reference groups memberships. And we actually we seek time in these reference groups to make presentations on the benefits of 30 km/h speeds in local streets for kids walking and riding. And we also make detailed submissions using community feedback to Wollongong Council. In terms of the local community, we have engaged with a local health charity, Healthy Cities Illawarra, and I'll talk more about this partnership later. We engage with local school principals, which I'll also mention later, and PNCs. And Safe Streets to School also has a Facebook page where we engage with supporters through emails and newsletters as well. In terms of local media, we engage with TV, radio, and print media. And we do this through either media releases when we're holding an event. We also share our resources to write opinion pieces. And we engage in interviews with either the radio hosts and ABC has been a support, or ABC has hosted quite a few interviews for us so far, and also interviews with local newspapers. We've also found it very important to engage with local politicians, and in this space we've hosted town hall meetings where we've discussed the barriers for active travel and for children walking and riding to school. And we've also talked about opportunities and encouraged and looked for supporters within local council to advocate for those changes. So milestones so far in the Wollongong or the Illawarra Shoalhaven draft regional plan, there is a planned 30 km/h pilot for Helensburgh. As well as that, Safe Streets to School, along with 30 Please and Healthy Cities and Walk Sydney, have made submissions supporting 30 km/h limits to local council and New South Wales State Government. And speed zone reviews are being undertaken across the region with a view to considering areas that could be suitable for the introduction of 30 km/h speeds. Okay. And the other milestone that I wanted to share with you today is a partnership that we've established with Healthy Cities Illawarra for a pilot slowdown day with 3 local schools. And this has been established through a $20,000 UCI grant that we won through an application process with New South Wales Sport and Rec. And it is supported by Council, Transport for New South Wales and the police. So we will be engaging in this pilot most likely in August. It's an ongoing project, but the slowdown day will be in August next year. So the other thing that's happening at the moment is we've been looking to seize the opportunity of the current changed behaviour for children in neighbourhoods, and with the idea that in New South Wales, children are likely to return to school in the next 3 or 4 weeks, and we would like to see that we'd like to see the great majority of the active travel that children are engaging in continue for travel to school and for other activities. So after holding a community town hall meeting about our Slowdown Day project, we had feedback from one of the community members to try and send a message and engage community to look to encourage and continue the behaviour that's happening at the moment. So we are going to, or Healthy Cities is leading this project, and they're going to post banners, working with the P&C to post banners around the school area to ask for drivers to slow down and to look out for others. And we're also working on a pamphlet drop to give that information. And that will happen within the area of the catchment area of the school. Because what we want to see is more kids walking and riding to school safely. Okay. So the actual slowdown day, which is planned for next year, it has a multi-agency approach, and we're working closely. Well, Healthy Cities is really leading this project with 30 Please and Safe Streets as supporters, and we've engaged with Wollongong Council. We've engaged with 3 local primary schools and the principals and P&Cs at those schools, as well as teachers and families. We've also engaged with New South Wales Transport and New South Wales Police. Part of the project will be riding education through Ride Nation, and the 3 schools that are involved will have an opportunity to engage in rider education when Ride Nation is able to attend the school. So the idea is to have a safe zone or a slowdown zone for one day for a whole day, and we'll have clear signed entry and exit points for that slowdown day, with many flags around the neighbourhoods and pamphlet drops around the neighbourhood, so people know to slow down and are encouraged to look out for children walking and riding to school. And the really great potential in this is that we're looking to build a resource that can be repeated at other schools in the LGA across New South Wales and around Australia. And as far as we know, this is the first slowdown day pilot for school travel in New South Wales and possibly Australia. So it's quite an exciting project. In relation to Safe Streets to School and having local advocacy around New South Wales and around Australia, and having a focused message where we're asking for the same things, this is really something that we're asking for support from people who are engaged in supporting active transport. And we know that there's similar concern around the country, and we already have other local groups forming. And we have a partnership with Get Up in terms of which helps run our petitions that we developed with those asks to present to local council. And we're also looking to incorporate as a charity. That planning is happening at the moment. So in terms of possibly engaging in this space, Safe Streets to School is scalable, and there's a lot of support that comes in terms of a web page is already established. The petition is established and ready to go for local chapters, and the asks are agreed upon. And the real effectiveness of having agreed upon and consistent, clear asks is that it starts to build across the state and across the country more effectively. We also have IT set up and mail groups and social media set up. What this allows is for people who establish a local chapter, it allows them to focus on local partnerships, local media and local politicians. And that's all I had to share today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, John. That was incredible. And so much good information to think about. Thank you to everyone who's adding some questions and comments to the chat. We'll get back to that in the Q&A session. Our final presenter this afternoon is Matthew Tappy McLaughlin, and I'd like to ask him to explain and share with us about making it Australia relevant, translating what we know about 30-kilometre speed limits for the Australian media.
Thanks, Rowena. Hi, everyone. An excellent hour of so far. I believe we've got about half an hour left. So I'm going to talk for, say, 15 minutes or so, and that's going to be with Lena. But first up, just like your thoughts on this, what's your top tip for engaging with media? So if you can go to the Menti and just pop in your thought on engaging with media. This is something we're going to be talking about for the next 15 minutes or so. And then we'll have an opportunity at the end, hopefully, to get some of your questions and have a bit of a discussion. Yeah, positive, not critical. That's a really nice one. And there's stuff coming out on that around positive message framing. Provide the facts. Okay. Provide the facts, just the facts. Okay. Clear message, clear call to action. I think clarity's coming through quite strong, and John talked about that, and I think that's a really important one. Opinion pieces. Brilliant. Okay. Just give people another couple of seconds and we'll call it there. Wow, thanks very, very much. I might share my screen now and just bring up presentation. All right. So yeah, I thought I'd just talk about the media part of advocacy, but also just position some of the advocacy stuff that we've been talking about in kind of a little bit of context. And I think a lot of the examples that have been used today, just absolutely incredible amount of work going on, and lots of stuff that we can learn from that we're doing really well. So I'm going to talk for, say, the first 10 minutes, and then I'm going to let Lena talk for the next 5 or so around a particular case study. I go by name Tepi. Nice to meet you all, if I haven't already. I'm a researcher at the University of Newcastle, but I'm quite a practical and pragmatic researcher. I'm actually in Perth at the moment, having moved over recently. So hello to everybody around. So what are we going to talk about? Well, like I said, we're going to talk about what is media advocacy. I think this is mainly me just also trying to pick up along the way and try to do things the best we can and learn from each other. So what is media advocacy? Then I'm going to talk about 2 case studies, one that I did, one that Lena's leading, very different scales, which I think is a nice point, and we can look at that. And we're going to look at the media strategies that we use to engage with Australian media, and also identify strategies for improving future media and media advocacy. And then talk a bit about conclusions. So what is advocacy? We talk so much about it, and we've had so many examples. People might have seen this definition before, and a lot of the good stuff that's going on in advocacy doesn't just have to be media, and we'll get onto that. But in a broad sense, mobilizing influence to bring about change. World Health Organization think it's a little bit, have expanded on that a little bit and say it's a combination of actions by individuals and social actions designed to gain either political support, policy support, social acceptance, or system support, or combinations of those for a particular health goal or program. So from my perspective, I'm a health researcher, so this is usually the kind of definition I go by. I know, not everybody wants to see frameworks and all of that sort of stuff. I'll try not to bore everybody to death, but I just thought I'd present some of the stuff, and I think can use some of John and Lena's examples. And particularly, John had a slide that was saying kind of some of his top tips for advocacy, and it was around having a clear and concise message, and that change takes time. Lena talked about, and so did John, around partnerships and coalitions. So you can see on this slide that the numbered boxes, this is a framework from Professor Trevor Shilton. It basically talks about the process of moving from, we've got a heap of evidence. The evidence for lowering speed limits is quite compelling. How do we get from there to actions? So it's around making it policy relevant. It's around presenting specific solutions. So how John was talking before around, it's either the 30k speed limits or it's footpaths and crossings. That's a really clear ask. Partnerships and coalitions, really important. So a lot of the slides that Lena and John were presenting, they've teamed up with other organizations, and that's really nice. And there's a little caveat to that in a second that I'll come on to. The 5th one here is where media advocacy kind of sits within the different strategies that you can use for advocacy. So John talked about going and speaking with politicians. We're all here at this webinar, and this will be an example of professional mobilization. Just basically means a bit of knowledge sharing. It means we exchange contact details. It's a networking thing. It's a learning thing, and we learn from each other. It's also a community thing. So if you consider yourself more as a community person rather than this is your job, then it's community mobilization. We're bringing everybody along the way. And then there's also some organization stuff as well. But advocacy, it's not as clear as a framework as 1 to 6. How good would that be if it was that clear? Researchers like to put things out. This is a very iterative thing. And one of the key things is that the way we frame stuff and the way we talk about things is super important. And that's sometimes been called the art of advocacy. So knowing exactly how to say something in the media, or know how to approach a politician with the right pitch and the right ways of doing things. Media savviness. So why speed limits? I'm not going to go over this again because Lena and John have done such a great job of this, but in a nutshell, the evidence is compelling, but we're only really getting bits and pieces of political commitment, so we've got to bring the politicians along route. Community acceptance is an intriguing one, and that there is some good acceptance for reducing speed limits in residential areas. And then actions are being trialled, but we need to scale these up quite quickly. So I was living in Newcastle and we had a trial of 30 kilometers an hour. It also happened to be the same road that they use for the supercars, where the cars travel at 200 kilometers an hour. So if a trial of 30 Ks works on that road, it will indeed work anywhere. So we've got a few options up our sleeve when it comes to media advocacy. We've got social media, which hangs off a lot of these other ones, and they all interact quite nicely. We talked about media events and stunts. John had some nice photos up of, engaging in, night rides and things like that. Proactive press releases and press conferences when there's, you want to get the message out, or if something's happened in the news and you can react to it, reactive press release. It's something that's really quite interesting in terms of it hasn't really been explored too much here. We've seen obesity campaigns over the years. We've seen tobacco campaigns, tobacco control campaigns. And there's bits and pieces of that still going on around the country. But we don't necessarily see too much for bikes, and we don't see too much for active urban design and 30 kilometers an hour streets and stuff that we're talking about today. There's opinion pieces, so people picking up the pen and trying to bring ideas and things together. And mass media campaigns very much related to the paid media stuff. There are examples of this popping up around the world. One is Bike is Best from UK. And I think as we progress over time, these things do take time, advocacy takes time. These are the sorts of things that we will be doing more and more of. Some of these rely on coalitions, and some of them are, less so, and some can be undertaken by individuals, particularly writing social media posts and engaging with opinion pieces for media, depending on your job. If this is something like me that's kind of aligned to your job, that this is a fantastic opportunity to engage with media and keep them up to speed on the latest evidence. So I said before that the political support's a really interesting one. And I also talked about how important it is for message framing. So almost 2 in 3 Australians support the government reducing speed limits in local neighbourhood streets. That's quite a broad and generic statement that people are supporting. And when we flip that to something more specific, it's interesting. Only 18% think the government is not doing enough when it comes to 30 kilometres an hour speed limits in high pedestrian areas. So the other 82% of people either think the government is going too far or about the right amount. And that's what Lena was touching on before around status quo and need to nudge people along in the right direction. So all of this fantastic advocacy is helping to change this. And we nudge people along en route. Because clearly between these two slides, there's some discrepancy and some misunderstanding, both nationally representative samples, both conducted in the last couple of years. So it's a really interesting mismatch. So what media busting? This is the small campaign that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to hand over to Lena. I picked up the pen and got together with some other academics and put together a myth-busting campaign for 30 kilometers an hour in Newcastle, but also a national article. I developed it with university communications people. So this is more for academics if there are on the call in terms of the actual process, but I just thought I'd give everybody a quick overview of what we did. So this was our media strategy. It was the Streets for Life campaign. I'm sure most people on this call would remember that from a few months back, run by the United Nations. That was a really nice week to hang media off. So that was our angle, and that was where we kind of pitched it to media. The Conversation's an online newspaper that academics write for, so that was our route in. At the same time as pitching to the Conversation, we pitched a local event where we had these signs made up, and we brought together a coalition of Newcastle Cycleways Movement, which is the bicycle user group, and Cycle Safe Network, which is the plan for the Hunter for safe walking and cycling network. And we pitched it to various different media outlets, eventually ended up with being published on TV, published on the Conversation, and we subsequently tried to pitch it to radio and TV. So that's the article down there if anybody wants to have a look at it. It was a nice, clear, concise approach that got picked up by multiple additional agencies. So it got picked up by the ABC, news.com, but that all took quite a bit of time, and I'll come on to that in a second. All of this takes time, and there's some top tips for kind of, as an individual, we can all be advocates. It's definitely great to join up and be part of coalitions, but we can all have our individual advocacy effects. It's best if we're talking with a clear and concise message. Subsequently, we had loads and loads of radio, but no TV, which is an interesting point and something that we're learning from with engaging with media. So these are my key learnings, and maybe there's some additional ones that people can pop in the chat that they've learned. Certainly don't consider myself as being the guru on all of this. So I want to know what you've got to think. But allocating time to execute the media strategy. John talked about taking a break from advocacy, and I think that's a really important one. It can lead to burnout, but in terms of this, we had a really nice, clear campaign. The photo on the right there, we got some photos done in Newcastle on streets where the speed limit was higher than 30, and got those done. That was really nice for local media. So allocating time to do all of that. This is a largely unpaid thing that people are doing, and we're giving our time because we're passionate about it. Persistence. So this is probably a key one. Lena and I were talking about how we were pitching different press releases and how we would engage with journalists. One of the really cool things that I found out from a communications person at the university was follow up within the hour, 2 hours. Give them a different angle. If you've given them one angle around safe streets to school, the school angle and the kids angle, give them a different one. Give them something that's around businesses flourishing because there's less noise pollution, so people are more likely to have a coffee outside. Just giving media different angles and doing it pretty quickly. So don't give the media too much time. The media move quite quickly, so repitching very quickly. Building relationships with journalists is a really important one, and like everything in life, they're people. So building continuous relationships with them, and then you become the person that they approach when there's a story emerging on something to do with walking, cycling, 30 kilometers an hour. I do this as part of a united voice. So with Newcastle Cycleways Movement until recently when I moved over to Perth. But a united voice, a coalition, a group, it's better to speak together, and it's better to know exactly what you want. And John and Lena have done, and others in their teams have done the fantastic job of getting to what is the policy ask, what are they asking for, and particularly you know, being very clear it's an either or for John's campaign. It's really nice, and getting to that united voice together. And finally, although it was a nationally pitched article, we made the most of it by also turning locally and doing our local event. So although we didn't pick up much TV, we did a radio interview in every single Australian territory or state, which is fantastic. And we continued that conversation by building the relationship with the journalists. So it does take a lot of time, but if you're passionate about it, it's absolutely something that we should all be doing, because we can all engage with media. Everybody's an advocate. If you're thinking about whatever you want to talk about, I particularly am quite a logical person in terms of what does the evidence say? How do we make it relevant? What are the specific solutions? And sometimes, even in our chat in this particular presentations, we're going backwards and forwards on little bits. You know, there was a really interesting question around the evidence for paints versus, you know, physical separation. Where once we get to the point where all of the evidence is super clear, the specific solutions become even clearer. And then choosing our combination of advocacy strategies and partnerships, and eventually turning that into persuasive messages. But it is about finding the right angle, and I think kids is a really good route in. Everybody can get behind that, and it's a good route for change. So this is where I'll hand over to Lena, who's going to talk more about this sort of stuff. Thanks, Lena. I think you're on mute, Lena.
Sorry. So in Wollongong, we started this campaign about a year ago. And so here are some headlines that we had over the last year. So some really positive ones. And that's basically part of this kind of strategy to kind of change the narrative around lower speeds. This slide was actually supposed to be earlier. That's, you know, what I'm kind of trying to do. I'm building alliances. I'm the vice president of Walk Sydney, and I founded 30 Please. And I also co-founded Safe Streets to School. So the Safe Streets to School, I think it's a really good one to kind of frame the issue around school travel. And I think that's why the local media here in Wollongong has picked it up, because almost everyone agrees kids should walk to their local school. And, you know, if you, for example, start a chapter for Safe Streets to School, or if you join us in Wollongong, what it does is you can speak on behalf of a group. And I think that's often even more powerful than just speaking as an individual. And you know, we in Wollongong are extremely lucky to have a lot of local media. I think it can be a bit more challenging in other areas. But here we have this kind of the local media, they're actually looking for stories. And I think that's why we actually almost once a month or so get some kind of media here. When we, for example, write a submission, then we also just send a short media release to all the like general email addresses of the different radio stations, press, and so on. And often they pick it up. Worries about speeding traffic is a very local, kind of huge local topic. So you were likely to get attention with that. When we, you know, due to COVID, we actually didn't do many kind of events, but that obviously is a good way to get media, is to do some action. I think what would be really nice if we had local chapters doing some like rollout zebra crossings and inviting media to that. I think that's really nice kind of picture opportunities. But then when you send out these media alerts also, the media has a really kind of news kind of approach to things. So it's kind of for the next day, you tell them what you're doing and remind them same day again. And depending on how much is going on in the city at a certain time, you might get media, but they might also not come. So it's a bit hit and miss, but it's also just good to have that photos and then send it to other more, there's some media that are a bit slower, like for example, some monthly magazines, and they're also happy to get that content from you. One way to also get media is to comment on Facebook on the local newspaper. So for example, this has headline here, where which was a really good one for us, was based on Facebook comments. So I think keeping that in mind, also when we share posts on Facebook groups, often media looks at those and then makes stories out of that. So with the language, you might have seen value-based messaging. There's a really good guide to that. And that helps that people agree more to what you're saying. But I think what we also, we're very aware that we're a grassroots organization and we can actually talk more freely than others. So we're one of the few independent organizations that's not government that can maybe use a little bit of a different twist to things. And I think the most important one is be authentic. So for example, for us, it's also, I think, acceptable to point out, oh, look, this street is not safe for kids to cross, where other, like a government agency would probably not be able to say it in such a way. Then we say it's crash, not accident. If you Google that, you find a little bit more about how to use language so it doesn't go into victim blaming, and it also kind of frames it in a certain way. I think that's important, and really important when when we use social media, we use the same high standards as on traditional media when it comes to language, because actually often you write something on social media as a comment and it does appear actually in the printed media. So just be aware, and I think that makes it more professional. So this year is a headline, cutting speed limits to 30k, a bad idea, says MP Ryan Park. And that's, I think, it was a good lesson for us. We never engaged with this MP because we focused on councillors. And sometimes when you might think it's a little bit of waste of time sometimes to reach out to certain people. But, even if they don't say something against you, that's actually also really valuable. So it would have been worth our time. And probably in the future, we should try to meet this MP, because obviously MPs are local influencers. They do get, they get heard. So we also use the approach of praising politicians when they do something good. Obviously, this is a cross-party campaign, so we try to be really fair. But here, for example, the councillor, she made a big case about trying to get more crossings to emotion, and we supported that by a media release. And the most, for example, our partnership with Healthy City 11 Hours means that now we have a proper charity with paid employees and actually somebody paid to do media. So that basically creates also more of that. So that's really powerful. And when I know we do a lot of things for Safe Streets and Wollongong, but we do have set it up so it's quite scalable. So if somebody starts a chapter, it's not obviously expected at all to put so much time into that. It's just some ideas. What can somebody do to make some change happening in the city? And we help a lot because a lot of things actually, submissions and so on, it's just copy paste. We made, for example, a submission in Tasmania the other day, and now we also got an article out of that. And then people from Tasmania now contacted us. So it is not as, it doesn't have to be all that. It's just the kind of things that we are doing. But if anybody has also even a little bit of time to give, it would be great to see more chapters, because that will make us stronger and get the message out more. So I made this really fast because we're running short on time. And TP, I think you have some final slides, is that right? Or shall we?
No, I think we can go to questions.
Oh, okay, go to questions. Sorry, we took a bit longer than expected.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Lena, and thank you, Matthew. We've got some great questions this afternoon that you've been contributing into the chat. And I also want to give opportunity for people to ask a question if they'd like to speak for themselves. So first, what I will do is ask a question that's on the chat, and if I see your microphone image come off, it's a signal to me that you'd like to speak, and then I'll invite you to ask a question. Otherwise, you can write into the chat box that you'd like to ask a question direct to the presenters this afternoon. So the first question I'd like maybe John might want to respond to from someone who's listening, and it was about how he managed to engage the council and how did he do that, and what support did he have in terms of, did he have specific schools or parent support for that?
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. And I guess the first way that I engaged with Wollongong Council was I actually put an application into the reference group that Wollongong Council held. So, so Wollongong Council actively seeks feedback from community representatives, and I was successful in being chosen as a bike riding advocate for that walking, cycling, and mobility reference group. So that was my first step in to engage with council, and then in that time, I really joined that group right from the start with a focus on, from a lived experience with my kids, really making that case for making walking and riding safe for children initially in my area, but after looking at a lot of research, it was quite clear that the population benefits are best when it's across LGAs, across the state and across the country. So that's when working with Lena, we really started to focus on how do we roll something out that's going to be effective across the country, really, but having lots of local examples and working with schools and school principals in that space.
I suppose just a quick follow-on question from that, John. Someone's asked, was there anything specific you did to engage the principals?
So I was really lucky to be able to engage the principals, starting with my local school where my children attend. And I had we have a very proactive principal at that school, and she not only engaged and supported the engagement that I had with families for that local school, but she also supported engagement for schools in what they call a community of schools. So school principals who she has close working relationships, and that led to another 8 schools being involved in the advocacy and, in the surveying.
Excellent, thank you. Another question I'd like maybe Lena, you'd like to respond to is about given the likelihood of death or permanent injury from, higher speed limits, 50 or 60 k's an hour, should more emphasis be placed on holding Australian decision makers accountable for the impact that occurs by their inaction? And how long do you expect it takes for change to occur?
Yes, I think it's definitely interesting to hold them accountable, potentially maybe by, especially the easiest and hardest one is for families who actually suffered loss if they actually sue, because the councils have a duty of care, and it's maybe at least something that they should consider. If somebody gets hurt in traffic, it is actually not just the person making a mistake. There is a safe system. There is a UN mandate for 30k limits, for example. So yeah, we could try to build up on that more. And it's definitely, yeah, I think there should be more noise around that. It's just unfortunate that for some reason we think that car accidents are like part of life, and that's kind of the public perception, and we don't really question why, for example, there were no traffic deaths at all in Helsinki and Oslo, for example. Nobody died in traffic and in those countries, because they have created that safe system. And we try to put that more into the public focus, but it's to make people individually accountable is interesting, but I don't know how exactly we would do that. And I would be really interested to know if somebody else, for example, has a strategy for us. We're obviously interested to learn if there's something we could do in that way.
Thanks, Lena. The next question we had, maybe John, you'd like to respond to, was about exploring the pickup and the drop-off times around Wollongong, and whether or not it is too hard or it's not the best thing to focus the energy on, or any thoughts for the future.
So is that adjusting the pick-up and drop-off times, or?
Yeah, it says, have you explored the closure of streets around schools in Wollongong at pick-up and drop-off times, as it is increasingly common in the UK, and that a trial was held in a school in Melbourne recently, but this idea is spreading very slowly in Australia?
I might ask Lena to answer that question, because I know she's done some research and is looking at that at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a really interesting idea to do that. So basically you close the school, the street where the school is located to traffic, through traffic at drop-off times, and then open it up for kids, and also let them play things like that. I think it's really interesting. It's not really part of our campaign. We just try to really focus on our key asks, but we're certainly promoting that idea through social media, or we also try to get it into the community. It's just not a core ask. We hope that maybe I would hope that maybe somebody else would just do something on that. It would be obviously easier to combine it, because if you just have this, the way our Wollongong schools kind of are, it's not just the school street that is a problem. Actually, the whole way from home to school is a problem, and we actually want to focus on that messaging more than just about the school gate, because that is in a way already kind of addressed a little bit with school zones, and the whole journey from home to school is not addressed at all at the moment, and we've been managed to change that, and that is the success in itself, to kind of get away from just the school gate thing.
Thanks, Lena. It's just a question that someone's asked, which is, how do we get the NRMA, so somewhere like the NRMA, to support safe or active travel to school?
Oh yeah, that we really, there's the AGM is soon of the NRMA. So if you are a member, I actually became a member because I thought it was quite useful anyways for me. So I became a member, so now I can make submissions to them for the AGM, and I have done that last year, and they actually picked it up, but they said they are not, they have some language about, they don't like a blanket approach to lower speed limits, but I think the more members point it out to them and point out the evidence to them, the more they're gonna pick it up again. There might be better strategies as well than just that one, but if you are a member of the NRMA, then just get in touch with us. We can also help you with what kind of things we're writing to them, because so you don't have to do kind of the work. We can help you a lot in the background with that, but we need people who kind of also reach out to them.
Thanks, Lena. And John, what evidence is there that ride to school days or slow down days actually have an impact?
Yeah, so maybe anecdotally, but my understanding of the Ride to School days does certainly create awareness, and it has significant increase in participation of walking and riding to school. Unfortunately, that is really focused on either the walk to school day or the ride to school day, so it's in isolation in effect, but it certainly is effective in creating awareness around active travel and creating awareness for parents, particularly, to look out for kids riding and walking to school. In terms of the slowdown days, there is good evidence to show that is a way to begin conversations about the need for change, and to also, because it's a one-off day, it's not something that is going to impact people greatly. We can just think, we can frame it, this is one day, we trial it and we see how it goes. And then hopefully that is a way to allow people to experience a slower neighbourhood, allows them to gain confidence with walking or riding to school, and then keeps that conversation going on why slower speeds in neighbourhoods is so important.
Thank you. Are principals responsible for keeping students safe to get to school?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I don't think I can answer that with too much authority, really. I do know that there is a level of, as a teacher, I know there's a level of responsibility for the schools, for children walking to and from school, and schools certainly feel that level of responsibility. I think a question that was linked to that came from Kevin about can schools stop children riding and walking to school? And I've experienced or worked in schools where they have said that children under a certain age are not allowed to ride or walk to school independently. So I think it's something that is a grey area, because there's so many agencies that are involved with the local transport network. You've got the school's responsibility, you've got state government. So I think that's where the focus for Safe Streets to School is really to hold, to give clear, concise solutions, but also to hold the policymakers accountable for the implementation of the local transport networks.
Thanks, John. One question we've received in the chat is about an area in North Ashfield where it's an entire through traffic suburb. So most of the traffic isn't local. So the question is more about the psychology of the drivers, asking how can we appeal to them to think about slowing down on their journey, because perhaps they don't have an investment in their area.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem. That's why, really the bigger we made this, the better. Because, for example, if you have 30K in your own neighborhood, what sometimes happens is then if you go to another neighborhood, you're more likely as well to slow down to 30. If you have 50 in your own one and then you are visited to a 30K one, that is a bit less likely for you to accept that is the right speed for that environment. So yeah, obviously advocating for statewide would be more effective for this. And that's definitely, it's definitely easier to do this the less visitors there are to an area. If you have a situation like that with the through street and we do not have much progress, let's say, on area-wide low speed limits, the only possible alternative at the moment is like traffic calming for such a street. Because if you just treat an individual street, you probably need to basically physically do it. It's really hard to just do it in one street by trying to change social behavior, especially if it's visitors. That is just really hard to achieve. That's why we basically want to go for the, hope that a lot of you go for the big message is to say we should have 30K in all neighborhoods, because that also will get out there. That message will get out there. If you did, roll that out in all neighborhoods, everybody will hear about it. That is for sure.
Thanks, Lena. A question that was asked is there any evidence of the effect of street painting?
So the evidence says the most effective measure to increase pedestrian safety is lower urban speed limits. So, it's not the evidence doesn't say the most effective thing is like footpaths. The evidence says the most effective thing is the lower speed limits. And the way, what I was presenting is to say, well, if you do lower the speed limit, then you can use painting. And in that speed environment, if people drive slowly, then that takes away the risk. And the paint on the street is basically just to give the pedestrians their own space. And if the car drives that slow, normally the driver will have time to stop before there is like a crash. And the driver, also if there was a crash, it wouldn't be as deadly, basically.
Thanks, Lena. We've only got one or two more questions left this afternoon, and one question is whether you are thinking about expanding beyond other trips, not just getting to school, but walking and cycling to the park, maybe to local areas to see friends.
Yes, yeah, that's really part of the campaign, and that's why our requests, our advocacy is around area-wide speed limits of 30 kilometres per hour at all times, because we know from evidence that children who walk and ride to school are much more likely to take other short trips by bike. And also there's that idea that children who walk and ride will push up to their parents, or not push up, but will request from their parents that they walk and ride either independently or with them. But the focus really is for safe neighbourhood streets, so that children can have that level of independence to get to school, but also to be able to play in their neighbourhood, to explore their neighbourhood, to be in nature, to connect with neighbours, and to be able to do that at all times, not just for school travel.
Thanks, John. And Lena, maybe you could comment on the idea of having a tiered speed system where there's a lower default speed limit and a bit slower for local streets, and then even slower around schools.
Yeah, so I think basically what we advocate in 30 places for a default of 30k. And if you want to make a street faster, let's say a Chiba road, that's obviously fine, but there should be separation in place, but kind of turning around the question. So you say, local streets are 30, except if the council or transport makes an exception for a street to be faster. Yes, and of course you could have slower, for example, I don't know, 25 and 30 is probably too little of a difference, but I might be wrong about that. But yeah, there's definitely also room to have play streets, have shared zones, things like that with really low speed limits, where you really want to create an environment that is just place. So yeah, definitely. But that's probably what's kind of needed. Is a bit more hierarchy, and not just, we have in Australia actually a really low difference in, so we are pretty slow on motorways compared to other countries, and then we are pretty fast in urban areas, and that it is definitely would be a good idea to change that.
Thanks, Lena. And
maybe just say that I'm not actually advocating for higher speed limits on the motorway, not to be misunderstood. That's really bad for pollution, the way we're set up. So I didn't want to be misunderstood here, but I'm just saying that, I was more talking about the urban environment, although there is some interesting studies from the UK. So when they changed to 20 miles per hour in most of their councils, they were actually thinking about increasing the speed limit on motorways, and that was a psychological thing. They thought, oh, we have to give something back to drivers. But then they looked into it, and they looked at the pollution effects, and then they actually didn't do it. They just did 20 miles per hour in a lot of councils. So it's definitely an interesting topic, but my personal opinion is we should definitely not create more pollution or emissions.
Thanks, Lena. Have you ever engaged with traffic engineers or council traffic planning, like Ausroads, because and what are the strategies to engage with this group?
Yes, so we are part of, for example, we are part of like a walking alliance group where traffic engineers are on board, and we engage with them. We have a network, we use LinkedIn a lot and that we are connected to these people on through social media, and talk to them, but there's we don't have like an official way, let's say. We don't have an official channel to talk to these, only through, like, the official channel normally is through submissions. But if somebody has a good idea for us how to do that in a better way, that's very interesting, and just send us an email.
Thank you. We have no more questions in the chat, but if you'd like, we can actually provide you with some of the links and suggestions that people have commented in the chat. It's been great this afternoon looking at some of the comments, some of the sort of suggested research or links that people have posted, so we can make those available for you as well. This is just a final opportunity for anybody to ask a question this afternoon. I'll just give you 10 or so seconds if you'd want to ask a question in the chat or yourself, and otherwise I'll finish up the afternoon.
Can I just speak directly? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, how you going? I'm Craig from Safe Streets, Fraser Coast. So I've been following some of Lena's work in particular and John's and so on, and very interesting. I'm actually an historian and in practice. And one thing I found very interesting is looking at the history of traffic over the course of the 20th century, that I've seen quite a consistent situation framework persist over that time, with very few exceptions where there's been a successful challenge to those that status quo. Is there any sense of looking in the past and maybe understanding what the reasons why we're at the point where we are with in terms of campaigning, what some of those social and demographic conditions are, for example, that may have led to increased car travel and so on, putting an historical perspective on where we campaign and how we can challenge that status quo?
Well, the one thing we did before we set up Safe Streets to School, we did look at Stop the Kindermoord from Holland. So basically in Netherlands was not always a bike-friendly environment at all. It was actually quite, there was a lot of kids dying in traffic, and it was very car dominated. And a campaign called Stop the Kindermoord, where the parents said, okay, that's enough, we don't want our kids to die in traffic. That's actually how they started to have that transition. So we did look at that, and we were discussing it also, the kind of using more this kind of bit more drastic kind of way to talk. Actually, in Wollongong, a little boy got killed when we also started this campaign on the way to school, exactly the kind of situation we're talking about. But we kind of, decided to go framing it a bit more like Safe Streets to School, and going a little bit of a different angle based on what we think the Australian kind of language is in that context, what people resonate with. And I think because now we can see that the media, for example, really picks it up a lot, and they give us a lot more attention than people who say, I want to go faster, let's say. So it's kind of working here in our context. So it was like a little bit of a trial to go that way. I'm not saying that, the going that other way because it does actually take a lot away from our kids not being able to enjoy their neighborhood. I personally feel it's really a big burden that we put on our kids. So maybe somebody else could, maybe different, using a bit more drastic language, more like the Netherlands would be interesting, but it's obviously always to be seen in the cultural context. And I think maybe people in the Netherlands, they might just have, I'm also German, so I have actually a bit more, probably a lot more direct way to think about these things than people in Australia have. So that, for example, John running the Wollongong chapter has done a really significant job here, and probably knows how to engage with the community than me as a newbie, let's say.
Thanks, and thanks, Craig, for that question and contributing this afternoon. We just thought we'd address one or two more questions, which was talking about linking school travel with physical activity for children, and also defining what is local and what is neighbourhood streets.
Yeah, so in terms of linking the active travel with physical activity for children, that's certainly a clear link that's been made by any research that's gone into active travel to school, and it's made very clearly by the Heart Foundation that active travel to and from school means that a child is more likely to meet their recommended daily physical activity measures for good health, and really importantly, it's setting up lifelong habits that mean that a young person is more likely to be active habitually throughout their life, which leads to better health, both physically and better mental and emotional health. So those links are well established in evidence and research, and we certainly, when we're advocating either through the media or directly to council, we certainly make those links.
Thank you. Well, that's sort of going to finish off our afternoon together. So thank you so much for attending and bringing conversation around a very important issue. If you have any other questions, we'd just like to direct you to Safer Streets to School or to 30please.org. So you guys have a great rest of your long weekend.